The Moon Twins present Part 1, the development of the theory of evolution. In this lesson, you will learn what did scientists discover and theorize about evolution, how organisms have adapted to their surroundings and changed over time, and evidence of evolution in fossil records. Let's get started. Charles Darwin, like most scientists, used information from many scientists such as Malthus to help formulate his theory of evolution, in which over a long period of time organisms eventually became what they presently are from ancient organisms. Malthus knew that populations formed faster than food supply, thus developing competition and the fierceness of survival by animals. Also, his observations of seeing very similar plants and animals on different continents spurred his curiosity. The concept of organisms trying to use survival tactics in nature was to become the concept of natural selection. Charles Darwin gleaned clues from scientists like Georges Cuvier, who stated that fossils are the remains of once living things. James Hutton's gradualism, which states that changes of the Earth are from cumulative effects of slow but continuous processes, and Charles Lyell's uniformitarianism, stating geological processes are still occurring today at the same slow rate. Charles Darwin's observations of seeing very similar plants and animals on different continents spurred his curiosity. This concept of organisms trying to survive in nature was to become the concept of natural selection. Let's learn more about how it came about. One particularly interesting stop in his voyage was the Galapagos Islands. These are a series of 18 to 21 archipelago-type islands formed by volcanic activity approximately 600 miles off the coast of South America. Having islands this far away from the mainland and from each other was one way the organisms that did arrive on each island learned to adapt to their surroundings to survive. Charles Darwin started to see the world as a stage for competition and survival of plants and animals, on display all over the world today. He knew that Malthus may be correct, that animals are constantly trying to survive in their surroundings. What he didn't know was the concept that would later be discovered by Gregor Mendel, that an organism's inheritance through mutations was at the core of organisms as a population changing to survive in their surroundings. Darwin noticed that one animal in particular, the finch, looked similar on each of the Galapagos Islands, but were also slightly different according to the food source they needed. But why were they slightly different yet similar in different locations? His hypothesis is that they must have had a common ancestor. Charles Darwin hypothesized that the finches and other organisms had survived on their particular islands by adapting for survival over time. The finches on islands with flowers eventually produced a long line of thriving finches because they successfully obtained food from the flowers with the beaks they had. The same thing can be said for the finches on the islands with cactus fruit. They survived with their beaks that could use the food on their island also. Darwin hypothesized that natural selection occurs when organisms with favorable variations survive, reproduce, and pass their variations to the next generation. This notion that organisms survive because of their adaptations to their environment can also be called fitness, the ability to be fit enough to survive and have the energy to produce offspring for the next generation. One survival tactic that is inheritable is camouflage. If an organism can blend into its environment and escape a predator, then it has a better chance of surviving. For example, the trait of the color green will camouflage the green beetle and their surroundings from the bird predator. It is said that the green beetle is fit. It will survive. Another example is mimicry. Mimicry will make a prey appear to be like another organism in order to evade a predator. For example, the patterns on a moth can look like the eyes of another animal. This allows the moth to appear like an animal and not a defenseless moth. Evidence of evolution can be found in the fossil record. Those fossils, known as the remains of a once living thing, in a strata or layers of the earth, are laid out from the oldest on the bottom to the newest on the top layer of strata. Depending on the layer the fossil is in determines the approximate age of that fossil. In fact, the definition of relative dating is a method of determining the age of a fossil by comparing its place in the strata with that of fossils in other layers. Absolute dating is a method that determines the decay of isotopes in rocks or fossils. It is also known as radiometric dating. It determines how much time has passed since rocks formed. Homologous structures are similar structures in different species that appear to have a similar origin. Organisms with homologous structures go through divergent evolution. They have similar structures, which implies they probably have common ancestors. Analogous structures describe organisms that have developed similar structures to each other in order to survive in their surroundings, and are most likely not from a common ancestor. Because they both develop with structures with a similar function, the term convergent evolution applies. Convergent means to come together. Seeing how organisms have changed over time is also a peek into the future. Phylogeny is the family tree of organisms with branches that show how they may have had a similar ancestor. They are arranged on a phylogeny with similar characteristics such as amino acid sequences and biochemistry such as cytochrome C. Another piece of evidence is viewing how similar embryos from 4 different species look. This may indicate they have a common ancestor. It isn't until you see an embryo in its later stages that you can finally see which species they belong to. The fact that they all had gill slits in the early stages is compelling for a common ancestor. One piece of evolutionary evidence of a common ancestor are the myriad of characteristics and traits that modern humans no longer used, but probably did at one time. These are called vestigial structures. The ability to move ears is related back to ancient man who needed to move their ears to hear their prey. The appendix has long been known as part of the intestine that no longer is useful, but may have been for an ancient diet. Now you have learned what scientists discovered and theorized about evolution, how organisms have adapted to their surroundings and changed over time, and evidence of evolution in fossil records. Be sure to check out the complementary activities on our Teachers Pay Teachers website, as well as lots of other topics.